Make host.
How's everybody doing today?
I'm super excited. Doing very well.
Right.
And this is the time that well, I guess I have to do a small intro super quick. So hello everyone. This is the 4th workshop. We already have quite a few fellow SPOs that have joined us. I really like your wallpaper here. I see Santorini. We have Joe Armeanio.
Don't look at my desktop, it's famous.
Yeah, we have Joe and Sam with us to do the presentation for the 4th workshop. So I am muting my mic and kicking back. Sam, you can take it away.
Okay. Sorry, I have 2 monitors and it's pretty messy here. Literally.
It's okay. Doing better than I did last time.
Okay, so I have to change the
While Sam is figuring this out, I just wanted to let everybody know that feel free during the session and whatnot, feel free to put your questions on the chat, and we're gonna make sure that we're going to address everything, guys.
Okay, can you see my screen?
Not yet. Yep, now we're good. Sam, you're good to go.
Okay, Joe, you can go ahead.
All right, so the first thing that we need to talk about that I guess we got into a little bit is this idea that watchers kind of represent a certain type of throughput for the Rosen system, right? And it's an adjustable dynamic that we have some capacity to scale based on how much pressure the system is experiencing. So why don't we go to the next and kind of explore that, Sam? So we've talked about Sybil resistance, trying to put in economic cost to be a watcher. It's important for everybody to recognize that that collateral is fully refundable, and it can be seen as a type of deposit that's subject to impermanent loss, but is not subject to slashing. The goal with that is, I guess, in Cardano, I'm sure many of you.
One sec. Sorry. I just I cannot see the Sam's screen. So I'm not sure if it's just me or not, but just for the recording purposes, I really need to have that in front of me.
Sam, you might want to right click and pin your screen, I guess. It would be on like the top of Zoom somewhere. I have no idea.
Sorry to interrupt you, but I really need this.
No, it's all right.
I want to make sure it's good for everybody else. Okay, I think. Okay, we're good. I'm good to go. Thank you so much.
Looks like somebody pinged and said Rick wanted to join, Sam, so you may need to add them as host.
Unfortunately, you gotta keep your eyes on for people that trying to join in there in the waiting room.
All right, so that Sybil resistance mechanism is just to put a cost. So it's important for everybody to recognize that initial collateral is not subject to any type of slashing. It's refundable. It is, however, subject to impermanent loss depending on price movements, right? And so that needs to be an assumption that watchers take into account as they put up their collateral. Why don't we go to the next slide? So permits are a different mechanism, right? They're imposing a cost of dishonest reporting. Essentially, how that's going to work is the permit, once it's been submitted to verify a transaction, is in a locked state. And being that it's in a locked state, the matter of number of permits that are circulating in the system actually start to matter, because you have a certain threshold that's created in order for an event to notify the second layer of the system. And I guess we can assume that if there are less permits in circulation, the verification of events is going to take more time, because the number of outstanding permits, can create some type of, let's call it congestion. But it's also important to note that the cost here is actually a part of the security incentive for users. So that cost of dishonest reporting is going to be somewhat correlated, we can assume, to honesty. So let's say that we set the number of permits at 20 are needed before a event notifies the second layer. That means that we can, essentially divide the number of permits that are outstanding by 20 and get an idea how many transactions can kind of clear at once. So when that is locked, it's in a state that it's locked until it is released back to the watcher along with the reward. In the event of dishonest reporting, that is subject to seizure. And so then you kind of have a cost imposed on somebody that's acting maliciously. So we can assume that based on like dynamic parameters in the system, if the permit price is higher, less permits will exist. If less permits exist, then it's going to take longer to clear transactions. It'll take longer for event verification to be reached. But we can also assume that there's a stronger incentive for honesty as more is at stake, right? More is potentially subject to seizure. There's a larger economic burden on the cost of dishonesty. When we go to the next slide. And so these are actually, it creates some kind of trilemma here. If you look at the parameters of a watcher itself, where you have the number of actors, which is also going to correlate somewhat to the number of permits. The speed for event verification is always going to be based on the incoming volume of transactions and the number of permits that exist in the system. And the cost of permits create that incentive for honesty. And that's something that we're going to have to somewhat dynamically balance as Rosen scales. Now, I'm going to kind of walk you through two different cases in terms of costing and how they would potentially impact like the economic implications and security implications of the watcher system. So in case one, we have lower collateral up front. And so in that case, we can assume that being that the barrier of entry is lower, it's going to be possible for smaller actors to participate, and there may be an incentive for one party to run multiple watchers. Now, in this particular scenario, being that the cost of a permit itself is higher, we can assume that there is going to be a stronger assumption or cost to dishonesty. Right now, in let's say case one, what may happen is being that permits have the higher economic cost, there may be less of them. And if there are less permits circulating in the Rosen system, the ability to reach the verification level, threshold, it may be a slower process, but it may be more, secure in terms of the assumption of honesty because there's a higher cost, right? In case two, the collateral is the higher friction point for economic entry. So we can assume that it's probably less useful for people to run multiple watchers, but the cost of the permits is lower. And in that case, let's say it's 1.5K Rosen, as in case two, I guess RSN is missing. We can assume that there's probably going to be more permits circulating in the system. So the ability for watchers to reach event verification and notify the guards something's happening is going to occur more rapidly because, well, there's more permits in the system. So that's kind of a certain trade-off. How fast is it going to be, and what's going to be the economic cost of dishonesty? We've said from day one, Rosen's not really built for speed because there's a lot of redundancy in the system itself. And so the team's initial thinking was to start with the, if you go back one slide, start with more case scenario one, where the barrier of entry to be a watcher is lower, but the permit cost or the cost of dishonesty is higher, which may make the system a little slow at first. We can go to the next slide. Now that's something that we're going to have to be somewhat dynamic with, because the system may experience periods of congestion, and if there's not enough circulating permits in the system to kind of keep up with the load, then we need to say, okay, I would say that's a sign we need to lower the cost of permits themselves, which does have some implications in terms of the cost of dishonesty, but it also allows transactions to reach the final stage of kind of the watcher process faster. Does that make sense to everybody? It'd be a good time to kind of take questions about that. Now, one thing that watchers have the ability to do is, as you're kind of recycling your permits through the system, you're also receiving rewards in RSN tokens. So, I would hope that if someone is more serious about being a watcher, it creates a certain incentive to build out a somewhat robust allocation towards the permit side. That way you can be involved in more transactions. That is one thing that watchers can use to kind of scale the profitability of being a watcher. Is the more permits you have, the more transactions you can be a part of verifying in parallel, and as such your rewards scale. So personally, I'm an advocate for putting the economic burden more on the cost of dishonesty. And I do think that, in the short term, that does give initial watchers some advantage, as they have the ability to either purchase or start building kind of a greater depth to their available permits. So this is a question that we've received a lot in regard to liquidity bootstrapping. Those of you that may have looked on our tokenomics, that consisted of majority of the allocation of Rosen, and it's important to kind of dive into what that means, right? So we are going to do an ISPO on Cardano. My goal, and I know Sam's goal, is to first put up our own funds that have been locked. We've used that as kind of a way to bootstrap liquidity depth on Ergo. You know, we're both not so exposed to the Cardano ecosystem just because that's not where our focus has been. But Rosen requires depth, right? That's ultimately what Bridge is going to have the most benefit from having is liquidity depth. So when we do launch our ISPO on Cardano, 100% of that ADA that's raised will be deposited into liquidity pools. It's not going to be one of these things where the team is going to, you know, keep a large portion of that. That's going to be, you know, put into, you know, decentralized exchanges. Now, you know, we're not 100% sure in terms of the direct path for that. Personally, I'm a fan of like rotating across major dexes every epoch. So let's say that in one epoch, we may go and deposit liquidity in MinSwap, and the next in Spectrum, and the next in Wing Riders, so on and so forth. That way we build liquidity depth across multiple markets. Now it does seem like Cardano is evolving to where you're getting, you know, something like tools to where you can pull orders from multiple dexes on the user side, which is great to see. But there's always some benefit in having liquidity distributed across decentralized exchanges. That way you get arbitrage opportunities and, you know, some unique, I would say broader market access within the ecosystem. But I want to make that point that our goal in that raise is to build liquidity for Cardano. And that's actually kind of a important part of how Rosen is going to work longer term. So when we raise liquidity depth, it's going to allow Rosen holders access to network coins across different blockchains. And it will be something long term that the guards try to manage across markets. You know, so I would say that some of that initial ADA from the ISPO will end up on Ergo. Some of it will end up on Ethereum. Some of it will end up potentially on, you know, Avalanche and other networks that we end up bridging to. And what that does is it starts to create major coin depth across markets. So, you know, the first example is going to be on Ergo. We're going to see some ADA that's wrapped and paired with ERG. And on Cardano, we're going to see some wrapped ERG that's paired with ADA. And our goal is to always use the funds and the collateral of the guard to create sufficient market depth so that the bridge has an economic use case. And, you know, we ultimately can get broader market access, not only for major projects, but it opens up unique kind of DeFi opportunities to where if I hold both of these assets, you know, I now have the ability to potentially provide liquidity either on DEXs or DeFi platforms in both environments. And as a user, I may be able to manage that liquidity based on slippage to my advantage. And the goal there is to, you know, expand the use case of DeFi protocols. I know that both Cardano, Ergo have, you know, some very different assumptions than we see in other ecosystems, which I think is ultimately part of why everybody here is contributing on either side. So our goal is to allow users, projects, traders to, you know, farm tokens, provide liquidity, and use Rosen as a means to balance that across different networks. And, you know, it's going to ultimately benefit a lot of DeFi protocols to where, you know, not only on Ergo itself, but on Cardano, and I would hope that every chain that Rosen can connect to gets more access to external liquidity. Sometimes when, you know, chains are a little bit too insular, it can create an issue with liquidity. I know that, you know, there's a lot of people, as an example, that would love to see native support for, you know, popular stable coins as an example. And there, you know, it's certainly possible depending on you know, the seizure, freezing, et cetera, that we have to see how that adapts. But Rosen can be a means to kind of backdoor around that, I guess. Let's go to the next slide, Sam. So Rosen, as part of our tokenomics, is to consider the friction involved. So with bridging, obviously, it comes with a certain cost, and we're going to, we're currently modeling anyway, a mechanism to take the Rosen token and use it to influence the friction rate or fee rate that users, projects have to pay. So right now, it seems like the simplest model is to create a base rate and a minimum rate, and then different discount mechanisms to kind of drive down the cost or economic friction using the Rosen token to facilitate that. And so we'll use an example where we have a base rate of 0.5% and a maximum discount rate of 0.1%. And then we have a bridge minimum fee, because I guess at a certain threshold, it really doesn't make sense to do much, because, you know, you do have a certain cost associated with transactions, and then you have the back end of Rosen, which is built around fee distribution. So we may actually have to, let's say, adapt this minimum bridge fee to the particular chain that people are using, just based on the cost of transaction. Why don't we go to the next slide? So, you know, discount mechanisms can be offered to individual users and to projects, which is kind of unique here. Together, they can potentially be combined to drive the economic cost down towards the minimum rate that, you know, is in the system, which, you know, as we proposed here, is going to be 0.1%. And so an example for a project, let's say that I have, you know, I don't know, Armeanio coin, right? And I say, hey, I want to try to take my token, and instead of chasing down central exchanges and paying them to access liquidity, I want to try to use this bridge. You know, I can have a listing fee to support that, and I can also use Rosen token to discount the actual bridge fee. On our token map, how Rosen is designed, that's an adjustable parameter. And essentially what that can do is, you know, offer a lower rate beyond the base rate, so that every user that wants to bridge my coin is going to have a lower fee associated with that. And then we can also offer this to the user themselves. Now, that would constitute locking Rosen, and we can create kind of a tier in terms of, you know, at one threshold, you get one discount, at another threshold, you get another. And basically, this would be a type of cashback mechanism where this would provide a airdrop rebate for a portion of the bridge fee to users. So they may still pay the rate of the token itself, and then on the other side, as their funds are released, they would see essentially the discount transferred. It's not really an airdrop in any specific means. It's more, it would be accounted for on the other side, the withdrawal side of the bridge. But that kind of gives users, I guess, more utility with the Rosen token, and can drive down some of the cost of using this. So token listings and fee distribution. This is something that we briefly covered in the past, but it's a good economic primitive and incentive for people to consider. So in the initial phases, we're going to encourage projects that want to get Rosen support to pay in the network coin. So, you know, if you're on Ergo, you're going to pay an ERG. If you're in ADA or Cardano, you're going to pay an ADA. If you're on Ethereum, you know, it would be in ETH, and those fees will be distributed. Now, For watchers, I do think that there's a certain incentive. We haven't built it yet, but we've been discussing, you know, distributing a portion of listing fees to watchers, but specifically watchers that have been actively using permits. Otherwise, it creates a incentive for people to become a watcher, get a permit, be inactive, and earn some kind of passive stake. I think that it should be more proof of work oriented. Now, what exactly, like, the duration we would scan for active permits is still actively in discussion because we haven't fully built this part of the system yet. Now, a portion of that liquidity is also going to go to guards, and it's going to be used to build liquidity depth. You know, again, as I stated, large part of the economic use of a bridge is to have liquidity distributed across ecosystems, and it's a way for Rosen itself to further raise liquidity on markets. And then there's also a back-end cost where, you know, we do have to consider, you know, the development side of scaling, depending on how quickly this, let's say, accelerates. We might need to have an incentive there to pick up extra development resources, especially as we move into different environments. That's going to be something that I would say is just kind of the cost burden of scaling on the business side. So the part of that fee will also be distributed towards them, and it gives a certain incentive for rapid integration response. You know, we can model some of the incentives there to, I guess, encourage liveness in the dev team, which is always good. So post ETH integration, we need to start saying, okay, I know that there's a huge demand in Cardano for stable coins, USDT, USDC, very well of the friction that's created when, you know, these entities want to lock, freeze, et cetera, et cetera. So, you know, the integration natively is still kind of an open question, especially due to costs. But using the Rosen fee mechanism for project tokens where they get more flexible, you know, let's say they raised USDC, USDT in their initial treasury. That's something that we can start locking into different ecosystems, which ultimately will bring, hopefully, stable coins into, you know, Ergo, into Cardano, and other kind of smaller DeFi ecosystems that, you know, right now are kind of starving for that type of liquidity. All right, let's get into the guard fund. Let's go to the next slide, Sam. So all Rosen guards will hold collateral in a multi-sig wallet. A goal of that collateral will be to bootstrap and balance liquidity across ecosystems. That means that the guards will have a somewhat active role in trying to manage and balance liquidity. You know, as a new chain plugs in, then we can say, okay, well, what's going to be the demand for, you know, multiple native assets that we can wrap into that ecosystem? And hopefully we can use that to kind of create infrastructure on either sides of the bridge, right? There's this whole idea of, I guess it's talked about in the US where, you know, sometimes we build a bridge to nowhere, right? There does need to be some support, I would say, in terms of building infrastructure across, you know, applications, DEXs, talking to potentially, you know, DeFi protocols and getting liquidity plugged into systems. Now, one really cool thing about Rosen is if you go to a central exchange, they have the ability to trade against you in-house. You can't see that. You can't track that. The primary function of Rosen is to continually have the guard wallets monitored, right? And so what that means is that the Rosen fund, the overall collateral in the system cannot move without being detected, and it will move through going through the same system as everybody else, right? Well, it'll be bridged. The watchers will have to confirm it, and then they will be distributed. So actually, when guards decide to rebalance liquidity, watchers get paid. So guards will have some flexible ability to invest, rebalance, buy, sell, etc. You know, they can potentially seek profit based on how you know, collateral moves in the system, how, you know, liquidity and permanent loss work out. That's going to be kind of always a work in progress. But it's not happening in a black box. And I would say in almost every major central exchange, you have no idea what their internal market makers are doing. You have no idea how they're rebalancing liquidity, and that's actually happening, at least in Rosen, in a transparent way, which I think is a major step forward. Why don't we go to the next? So, and a part of understanding this is as a new chain plugs in, let's use the example of, you know, let's say in theory, we've set up the bridge between Ergo and Cardano. We've balanced the liquidity that we used from the ISPO across networks. We plug into Ethereum, you know, and the guards say, okay, well, now we need to move some of the liquidity that exists in the net system and spread it into this new ecosystem, right? We need to bootstrap some of that liquidity, and it can be seen as like infrastructure use case for the other side of the bridge. So some of that ADA that will have initially been raised and then put into public markets will be rebalanced into Ethereum. And so then it opens up opportunities for people to provide, you know, dual sides of ADA ETH and on DEXs if they want to. We can potentially see if there's any willingness for, you know, DeFi protocols to participate and, you know, open up farming opportunities for users, etc. But that rebalancing is, I guess it's somewhat similar to what we see with, you know, Tether, even though that's kind of its own unique black box. They're continuously rebalancing their stablecoin liquidity across ecosystems that they're plugged into to try to make markets more efficient. So, you know, the guards are going to need to provide that as a service, and it is something that they can potentially profit from. But again, it goes through the watcher network. So as watchers, everybody is not only going to be able to see and track that in real time, but you actually get profit distribution from those major transfers. All right, I saw a couple questions in chat. Let me pull it up. Let's see. Looks like we have a question from Ahmed regarding the
Joe.
Yeah.
Is it okay? I would like to start with, before we get to these questions from the guys that we have here from our audience, I would like to touch up on some comments that I got during the week, and I think it's really important for us to answer those questions or feedback actually, and I think after that we can definitely go to everybody else. It has quite a few parts, that question, so I'm just gonna go over it one by one, because I think it's always good to have, you know, the good feedback, but also it's good to have the constructive feedback. So I would like us to start from there, if that's okay. So the very first comment, and I'm not gonna put any names out there because I don't think it matters so much. So the comment starts, I don't love the tokenomics. I'm expecting 2 clean slices like Ergo and Cardano with an 80+ for public. That pie chart is an eyesore. So let's start with this.
Sure. You know, let's say the primary part of our tokenomics, right, has to do with liquidity bootstrapping. That's not really value extraction. That's creating markets, right? And as I said, if you do not have, if you look at most bridges in the crypto space, what you'll find is you have some with tremendous TVL with actually very few users, right? The distribution of assets across many bridges more or less sucks, right? A couple of funds are using it primarily for market making purposes across networks, right? And so we have this hurdle that we run into where you can build a bridge, but there has to be infrastructure on both sides of the bridge. Now, one thing that let's say with the ISPO, that's not going to fund development directly. That's going to provide liquidity, right? And that liquidity is needed for Rosen to scale, not only between Ergo and Cardano, but future instances in the future, right? So if we move to Ethereum, if we move to Avalanche, etc., that initial liquidity from the ISPO is going to put Cardano into multiple ecosystems. And our goal is always going to be to maintain sufficient depth, right? I think we've done so far a pretty good job with the initial IDO on Ergo side in terms of the amount of Ergo that's now available for users, because Ergo is not the most liquid asset, right, on across markets. Part of that is because the foundation has always tried to be very neutral and not trade against the community, which I've always supported, right? But when you're talking about the use case of a bridge, that liquidity becomes a dominant factor, right? Usually, if you look at how most traders will, let's say, approach, markets, they'll usually chase liquidity depths because there's less slippage. It's just the simple term for it. So I understand that there, is concern like, hey, you're extracting, value through the ISPO, but it's not really paying the team directly, right? It's going to be locked into markets. Then what's going to happen is they're going to receive Rosen tokens. Maybe they want to run a watcher. Maybe they're just using it for more of a speculative nature, right? That's fine. But a liquidity depth is important, right? Now, in terms of let's say distribution, there's a lot of dev costs here, right? We've been carrying this out of pocket at the expense of about 30K with no pre-sale, well, 30K a month with no pre-sale, no raising to anyone. And one benefit that we have in going that path is the liquidity that comes to market has nobody in front of them, right? A lot of the times when you get the seed round pre-sale, Series A, Series B, you have people that are coming in at a major economic advantage, right? And so, in terms of, I'm not going to say that's unfair, but it's an assumption that people need to look at, specifically with new assets when there's money that came in at a lower input cost than the public. Usually they have, more profitable range where they could exit than the public. And we tried to eliminate that.
Cool. Thank you, Joe. Super quick. I'm just gonna touch really quick. I don't love that there's an ISPO that competes with other SPOs. So obviously you just answered that. I just
and there was, I will even say, I was exploring. I'm not so Cardano native, right? So I'm going to be the first to admit that. I was looking at the ISPO mechanism, and I'm thinking, shit, if some whale were to come in and they were to lock, let's say the maximum amount, then you're in like this dilemma where potentially you would have to spin up another pool, and then how could you theoretically prevent that? And so we've had some discussions in terms of, okay, well, what can we do on Cardano that hasn't been done? One thing that would be interesting would be to create a threshold that's publicly known before an ISPO. Let's say, I don't know, 500,000 ADA, 1 million ADA, pick an arbitrary number, doesn't really matter. And make it known that because there's a swap occurring where, the people that are delegating are getting paid, right? You know, like you set your fee and then there's a swap that's occurring to pay out the fees that are collected. You could potentially hire an auditing service, scan wallets, and say, okay, well, if a whale is trying to double dip or pass that threshold or whatever, we're going to distribute it to Tosi Drop and Drip Drops and give it to the public, right? I mean, there's a lot of different games with that. I think haven't really been explored that kind of get away from. I can see some potential benefit of having like a hard what is it called?
Cap.
Yeah, what was I can't remember. I think contingent staking was like one proposal, right? And I think that there may be some, you know, creative games that can be played to avoid that particular outcome, or you know, let's say create better distribution. Now, certainly that's a big question. Like, I don't want to, you know, especially with, you know, network parameters, and I know there's a certain amount of drama there, and there's already economic stress. That kind of, I definitely can understand, let's say, why that may not be, you know, something that makes SPOs happy, but I don't see, I don't see it, number one, us like being there for, you know, terribly long. Use it as a means to distribute tokens, see how we can potentially come up with some creative solutions to do that fairly, and, you know, then hopefully create a revenue path for, you know, SPOs.
Hey, Joe, can I jump in here
Sure.
and help you out?
Sure.
I apologize. I have to leave to go to the airport to fly to Dubai, like in 20 minutes. Okay, I
Safe
gotta
flight.
leave. Okay, thanks. All right. So I agree with everything you're saying. If there's an ISPO, that needs to be very well thought out. Okay. But I also want to add that I think this is a extremely good case to go to Project Catalyst specifically to get liquidity, specifically to fund the bridge. And this has to be very carefully thought out for the high value coins, not tokens, but the coins such as the Ethereum layer 1 coin, not the Ethereum tokens, not the ERC20s, with the exception of like USDT, etc. And Bitcoin, and like pretty much anything in the top 10 on coin market cap, for example. That's just an example. This is going to be very well thought out, but I'm okay with trying to make the pitch to the public and say, you know, in a very transparent way, and say, hey, this is the whole point of us paying taxes into Project Catalyst for the last 3 years. One thing is to build developers, to get developers funded so they can build. And number two is for interoperability. We can't have interoperability without liquidity. And I think one of the problems is we don't have enough degenerates on Cardano. We just don't have a lot of degens. Look at our TVL percent compared to Ergo. Cardano is a 2.5% TVL. But I think we do have enough whales, or not just the whales, but I think we can get enough support to say, hey, if we want this interoperability, there has to be ADA and Bitcoin in the RosenBridge on both sides. And there's got to be, you know, ADA and Ethereum on both sides. And that's why we've been paying taxes, not to both build it and to fund those bridges. And I just wanted to make that point. I'm okay with totally backing this up in public and doing my best to get the word out and say, we need your support to get this stuff funded. Even if the ISPO, you never know with the ISPOs. If you do a super ultra degen ISPO, you might get really good participation. You might get really good amounts of ADA, right? But on the flip side, it does cause the stake cooperators to go,
yeah, I know. And the same is probably true with Catalyst. You know, it's one of those things where it's competition for limited resources, right? So then it's, at least in my mind, there needs to be a very clear, you know, roadmap, intent, and purpose to what we're doing. Otherwise, you know, it just opens the door to criticism, which, you know, that's always the case. I think everybody in here has been in crypto long enough to know there's always some kind of micro drama going on. But yeah, you know, it's something I would consider, but it's also also up to the Cardano community, right? I don't have enough ADA to have any meaningful impact on the
Yeah,
outcome there.
it's all about messaging. I mean, the people who are big into the DeFi get it. There's a lot of
Mhm.
people who get it, and they say we need to take that ADA we've stockpiled. We got a massive 1.4 billion ADA war chest
Mhm.
sitting over
Yeah.
there. I'm not saying spend it all at once, but I'm
Yeah, of
saying
course.
that's what it's there for, right? We just put 50 million ADA into Fund 10. Okay, now I tried in Fund 10, I tried to get Maya Protocol funded. I pushed for it mildly, I didn't push for it. I just said, yeah, hey, look over here. Maya is similar in nature. It's like Thorchain, but it's Maya. They need ADA liquidity for a bridge. They're going to build it anyway, but they didn't get it. They didn't get it. So,
Mhm.
but I think if there's multiple people saying, hey, this is what Cardano was built for, and this is how this has to be done to bridge, we can connect the other chains all day. But if there's no liquidity in the bridge, it's
Then
pointless.
you run into
There's a
the bridge
telephone
doesn't work
line that nobody's
problem.
using. Yeah. There's a
No, well,
phone line that nobody's using.
that's
So
specific. That's specifically why there's a major allocation in the tokenomics for bootstrapping liquidity. Because if you build a bridge and there's no liquidity on either side of the bridge, you've built infrastructure with no use, right? And so our goal is, as Rosen expands into an ecosystem, we're going to try to use Rosen to raise liquidity and then balance it across ecosystems to at least open the door, set the foundation, and put in the initial infrastructure that then people can come and participate with. And so liquidity depth here is ultimately what's going to drive the success of Rosen.
yep,
And so
100%.
and so I understand what Chef was saying, like, hey, why are you raising funds, and zero allocation of that is going to go directly to the team. It's going to go to markets, right? And then be balanced across markets to create that core infrastructure that then people can use and trade with. And I'll just use the example, with the Rosen pair on Ergo. We've roughly matched the entire user and the KuCoin allocation, right? Just in that one pool. So now that gives us tremendous depth and liquidity to move across other markets that's competitive to the largest exchange in the ecosystem, right? And so, hopefully we can, I would imagine on Cardano, that's going to be a lot harder to emulate, being that it's just been around and it's larger, has more market access. But liquidity depth here is what's most important.
Hey, I agree 100%. This RosenBridge has to have liquidity to work. It has to. That's traffic. User traffic can't flow without liquidity. Last thing I wanted to touch on, I apologize. Thank you for your time.
Sure.
I'll hit it real quick. We might want to have a separate working group. I'm okay with heading that up and say, hey, we need to think about a certain token thing. I could be wrong, but I'll give you an example. If someone spins up Bob token, not coin, coins are very important, especially ETH and Bitcoin. But let's say someone spins up a native asset on Ergo called Bob token, and then says, hey, I'm going to pay the fees and I'm going to bridge Bob token over to Cardano where there's more activity going on. Maybe they want some Bob token, and they bridge it. Okay. And they pay the fees, which is modest. I mean, the fees are there, they're good. And then they say, this isn't working out. I'm going to go ahead and spin up another Bob token on the Cardano side. And so I'm going to have bridged Bob, and I'm going to have bridged to Cardano Bob, and I'm going to have Cardano Bob bridged over to Rosen Bob, right? And then I'm going to make our Bob tradable with Bob on Cardano and the DEX, where they can swap them one for one. And now all of a sudden we have this token diarrhea all over the freaking place.
Yeah.
We go, what the hell are we bridging here? What was the point of that, right? So I wouldn't call it an attack. I would just say it's a type of sloppiness that's available. Someone might use it to play games.
Yeah,
or
there's,
something.
that needs to be a consideration long term. I think we talked about that in the first workshop, even.
Yeah.
Like,
Okay.
that's
I
something
forgot. I'm sorry.
that's totally fine. Actually, one thing that we're working on, I know, on the Euro side is Paideia, which is a kind of a DAO framework. It's all on chain, and we're looking at it as a software suite to where watchers can, actively have their own governance that's on chain, right? And guards can then do the same. And a lot of these management questions get a lot easier when you have the right tools, in my opinion. So, once we have the tools in place to really address that type of questions, I think we certainly have the community to do so. I think right now, like our goal in terms of the Rosen side right now, we've launched our IDO, we've got some liquidity on the Ergo side. It's all, technical rollout, make sure everything is running smooth, operating smooth. We're not going to touch any ISPO until everything is as we want it, right? And then move to potentially bring in Cardano liquidity. So at least on our side, we're kind of in like the pre-launch sequence, if that makes sense.
Totally makes sense. I'm 100% with you. Thank you, Joe. Thank you, Theodore. Thanks, everyone. I got to punch out. Take care, everybody.
All right. Have a safe flight.
Thank you,
Right
Rick,
on.
for your questions. I just want to be aware of everybody's time, but at the same time, I want to make sure that we answer all the questions. So if somebody has to leave because, we hit almost the 1 hour mark, feel free to do so. I'm going to keep Sam and Joe here with me just so we can make sure that we answer all the questions that you have on the chat. And I will also make sure that they're going to visit the Discord chat that we have and make sure that we answer some of the questions that you previously put in there. Joe and Sam, I'm going to go hit the rest of the questions super quick. Please feel free to give the answers. I just have one more in terms of these comments that I started mentioning earlier. And it can be a very quick one, I guess. I don't love the upfront costs for permits that require Rosen token.
Well, that's the cost of honesty. It's a simple answer. If you don't have a cost there, you don't have a cost of honesty. You don't have a cost of honesty, you're gonna have a terrible oracle.
Copy that. I'm gonna go super quick. Ahmed had the first question, and I'm hoping I didn't miss any other. But he says in the presentation, it mentions 1K Rosen and 1K Ergo. Is that 1K of each coin or 1K USD worth?
It was actually just a proposed parameter, right? Because it's adjustable. We didn't actually want to set market cost before the coin was in market because it's a moving target. We wanted to get things live, see where they landed. And actually, once the guard set is set up, we're going to have an internal discussion and we're going to announce the starting point based on market prices, right? So I tried to use that more as a visual analogy than like a practical cost at this point. It hasn't been set, and it may be adjustable as we covered today based on the pressure that the system has, because it's especially the cost of permits, the amount of circulating permits. It's a way we can scale the system.
Ahmed, I know you're on the call, so if you have a follow-up, feel free to just unmute your mic and go for it. And I'm going to go to George's question now. I wasn't able to join the previous workshop, but I watched the recording. I wanted to know what happens with the 10% of the Rosen tokens reserved for the initial liquidity bootstrapping. So I'll stop there.
Yeah, 5% of them have been released in the Erg IDO. 5% of them will be distributed in the future on Cardano.
Okay, thank you. And the 38.5% reserved for future liquidity bootstrapping after the locking period passes. I believe there was a period of 1 year for the initial liquidity bootstrapping. I don't know if it was mentioned anything about the 38.5 reserved for the future liquidity bootstrapping.
Sure. So on Ergo right now, we have about 200K ERG that's locked in the pool for a year. That was meant to give ERG, community a certain assurance that liquidity is not going to disappear. As liquidity is raised in new ecosystems, it'll periodically need to be rebalanced across ecosystems, as I was talking about today. So it's important to always have some of that unlocked so that liquidity can be fluid and adapt to new ecosystems as needed.
And George, you're in here. Feel free again. Like, guys, when I go with your questions, feel free to unmute after that and do follow-ups. By all means, this is an open discussion here. Rick kind of mentioned it. I know he left, but maybe we want to touch base again on it super quick. I have a question, or more like an input on 2 items. One, also gain liquidity for ADA/ETH ADA/ERG using Project Catalyst. He just mentioned that. We need to think hard about bridging tokens as compared to bridging coins. And yes, we do require a separate meeting discussion for that. And he also asked about the 800K ADA from Project Catalyst Fund 10, if that was initially in the bootstrapping liquidity.
It was a part of that has been gone to cover actually the development costs proposed there, because we are actually working to integrate this into the SPO framework to try to create revenue, so it's easy for you guys to all manage that. In terms of Catalyst, yeah, we did apply. We definitely got a lot of help from Zengate, and you know, it's a political system, so navigating those waters are somewhat foreign to me and Sam. So if watchers and participants think there's a use case there, we're more than willing to pursue that avenue. But I think that ultimately it's community consensus based anyway. So I guess if it's popular, it would get funded.
Simon asked a question, and I know I just want to mention this. There has been some questions on the general chat on Discord. As soon as the call is over, I'm just going to start going over them and start tagging Armeanio and Sam. So guys, I'm gonna keep you a little bit busier after our call. I just want to make sure that everybody has answers to their questions. So let's go to Simon. Was this whole concept audited? I mean, not just the code, but the principle.
The principle of this is actually somewhat similar or somewhat simple. You know, the point of failure primarily in Rosen is the guard set, and then we've built a lot of redundant auditing around that. So we're actually pulling, if you look at what we're trying to create, we're actually pulling from a lot of central exchange models, and then we're building kind of decentralized layers and fee distributions around that. So a lot of the core principles here are already in use in major exchanges.
Cool, thank you. I think we went through all the questions.
All right, everybody, I gotta run. So I hope everybody enjoyed the call, and feel free to drop some questions on Discord. I'll try to get in there later today and dig through them.
Awesome, guys. Thank you so much for joining. Again, feel free, if there hasn't been any, if we haven't answered any of your questions on Discord, feel free to just ping us again, like put them at the very, at the very end of the chat, just so we can make sure we answer all of your questions. I know it's really important for everybody to have all the information needed in order for you to, go through these workshops, stay with us, and quote unquote waste your time with us. So we want to make sure that we give you all these answers, and there's going to be a lot of educational content that is going to be coming out in the next days and weeks. We do have some of the tutorials started already, so we're going to make sure that we're going to share all that stuff with you, so you can start getting more and more aware of the setup and the whole process that needs to be done. Guys, thank you so much for your participation. Thank you so much for joining us, and I'll make sure I'll post this recording as soon as it's all rendered and good to go. It will be on YouTube, and I will share it with everyone, and I will also share an email with the slides and whatnot. So thank you everyone for joining, and looking forward for the next workshop. Take care.
Appreciate you guys. Have a nice one.